And now I shall reveal my ultimate weapon. A magical item which will destroy all of the paladins of the world. It is an evil item. It is a cursed item.
A hot, cursed item. Hello and welcome to this week's episode, Cursed Items. Well, you've been asking for them for quite some time, so here is my take on just what is a cursed item. Now, there are 6 types of cursed items that you can have. There are 6 questions that you can ask yourself, and there is a statement containing 6 words which you should always apply to your cursed item. And the question is now, how do you remove the curse that I have bestowed upon you at the beginning of this video? The answer is by repeating the number that I have already given you. Yes. Cursed for all eternity! Oh, perhaps not, if you were paying attention. So when we talk about cursed items, the thing that I find the most important is to look at the 5 R's and 1 C. Now, those 6 different types of cursed items are absolutely vital because the foundation of any good cursed item, and I'm talking about custom-made cursed items here, I'm not talking about the run-of-the-mill, open up the book and find them. I'm talking about cursed items that you yourself have created very specifically for the party. Now, I'm not talking cursed items that are designed against the party. I never advocate designing cursed items to punish your players or to punish your PCs. I never advocate that. Cursed items should be cursed items that are there that the PCs happen to pick up. And there should be plenty of options around that as well, but we'll come to that later in the video. So the 5 R's and 1 C. What are the 5 R's and 1 C and how they're going to help us make better cursed items? Well, the first R is, he looks at his list quickly, revenge. Revenge. The cursed item. Now, this is a question that you should ask yourself with every cursed item. Why was it made and who made it and what was its purpose? What was the person thinking when they crafted this magical item? Because ultimately somebody did. Whether it's a god on high or it's an ancient alien race, because cursed items, by the way, can be used in science fiction campaigns beautifully, and I'll give you some examples a little bit later on if you remind me. So cursed items, we look at why they were made, who made them, and the category that we're looking at them in is revenge. This magical item was constructed for revenge purposes. Now, revenge purposes implies an individual entity. So this dagger is cursed such that when anyone of the elvish bloodline were to pick it up, they would become infected with a hideous disease that causes them to rot and slowly transform into an orc. That is a revenge-based item. It was designed by the user to get revenge on somebody. Now, these kind of magical items are fantastic because they have a very clear solution. Either they fulfill the revenge that they're going to do, or they need to be used in getting some kind of revenge. Once you've stabbed an elf with the blade is no longer attached to the user, etc., etc., etc. So revenge is a very powerful motivator for magical items, and one that you must consider when creating your own. The next one is retribution. Now, retribution sounds very similar to revenge. If you are getting retribution for something, you are obviously taking revenge for something in a similar kind of way. Revenge, however, is personal. Retribution is far, far bigger, far, far greater, and the idea of retribution is that this blade will be used against all sentient creatures, or this blade is the idea of seeking retribution against an entire species, not just an individual, which is the revenge magical item. The revenge magical item, as I said, might be used against elves. Retribution would be used against the entire elvish people, and only once the entire nation has been eliminated will the curse be broken. So retribution is a very, very useful, very broad stroke kind of thing. Retribution might be your cataclysmic magical cursed items that the players come across and now have to try and somehow diffuse. So retribution is a significant space, a significant state. Now, if you wanted to look at, for example, retribution items, those are things like Orb of Annihilations that only destroy elves, or only destroy dwarves, or only cause a certain type of alignment to go insane, for example. The next one is remembrance. Remembrance is important. Cursed items can just be about remembering. Now, a blade that the character picks up and suddenly it starts transforming them into the original creator of the blade, or let's not use blades anymore, let's say it's a shield or a helmet, that when the wearer dons this particular brassiere, or perhaps it's a dress or a kilt or a pair of boots, they start to slowly transform into the original creator of the magical item. That's its curse, is transformation. So the remembrance driver is not necessarily a malicious one. It's simply a, hey, don't forget I exist, which is fairly important for a lot of creators. Immortality is something that a lot of magic users seek, and well, that could be one of them. Now remember that I was telling you that sci-fi can have its own form of magical items. Well, we need look no further than our own backyard in terms of Star Trek, where the crew of the USS Enterprise D come across a space probe which scans the crew, and suddenly Captain Picard is comatose. He himself has been whisked away to another planet where he goes through his entire age. He literally survives for an entire generation and eventually dies, and when he dies he's returned to the ship. Is that a good item or is it a cursed item? Well, in my opinion, it's a cursed item, but remember me. The curse was that whoever saw this object, in this case a space probe, they were transported back into this virtual reality where they then experienced the full length of the curse, which was to live out the final days of this alien species before their sun went nova. Now, in the case of Captain Picard, he rallied against this idea. He tried to find solutions and ways to get out of this star destroying the planet, and ultimately he couldn't and had to simply accept his fate. That's a pretty horrific curse, if you ask me. Live out your entire existence, knowing that there's nothing you can do to change the course of history. You are fated to die. And to know that it's going to happen. That's a pretty serious cursed item, if you ask me, and a wonderful, wonderful science fiction opportunity. Another example in cursed items is, one could say, that being locked in a holodeck with a demented hologram is another type of curse that one could bestow upon the characters. So curses can be used across the spectrum. They don't necessarily have to only be in fantasy. Anyway, I digress. So we were on remembrance. The next R that one can look at is return. Now, the return function is one that Tolkien used. The ring wanted to be returned, reunited with its master. So its curse was that whomever bore it, yes, they had the ability of invisibility, but that wasn't actually a benefit. That was simply the character being sent into the ghost realm, or the death realm, or the nether realm, or the dark realm, whatever you want to call it. The shadow realm, let's say. And the shadow realm was really just a beacon for the Dark Lord to see where the thing was. And every time the character went into that space, everyone could see where he was. So that was more of a curse than anything else, because the people that couldn't see him weren't nearly as dangerous as those that now suddenly could. So the return option for a cursed item is a very powerful one. A gears, a compulsion effect. You must now take this object to such and such a place where you must now destroy it, or it will consume you. So the return option is a very powerful one. And then finally, of course, the resurrection option is the one that is always a kicker. He whomsoever wields this sword shall be converted into a demon, and that demon shall be the original creator, who has now found a way of bringing themselves back to life. In essence, this cursed item is, of course, a conduit for that individual soul to bring them from whatever plane they're on, to the prime material, and allowing them to resume their dastardly ways and to take over the world once again. Mwahaha. So the cursed items, the R's, are fairly straightforward. Then finally, the last type of curse, the 1C, the C stands for comedy. And cursed items can be used for just that. They are cursed. They cause some kind of grievance or difficulty for the player who wields it. A ring of ever talking, for example, that a ring just won't shut up. That's been borne by a thief. Another suggestion was gloves of stealing, which allows you to steal almost any object that your heart desires. But the moment that you've got it, you give the gloves plus the object to the person standing next to you. They, of course, now have the gloves. The moment they steal something, the gloves get passed on to the next person, and so on and so forth. A central idea around this is pretty much comedy. The magical items serve no purpose other than trickery, tomfoolery, and causing absolute chaos and pandemonium. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. A little pandemonium is always fun, and you can always imagine some crazed necromancer deciding that he wants to create magical item boots of jolliness that will cause you to laugh out loud inexplicably every 5 or 6 minutes. That would be a particularly nasty curse. It would also be quite an interesting one to try and enforce around your table. So those are the 5 R's and the 1C. I went through them quite quickly, so I'll just recap. You've got revenge, you've got retribution, you've got remembrance, you've got return, you've got resurrection, and you've got comedy. Those are the 6 different types of magical item that you can have. So now once you've decided on which magical item you want to go with, you can now start to craft it looking at your 6 questions. Now the 6 questions will help you decide exactly how this magical item should play out and what its ultimate purpose is going to be, because we haven't yet looked at statting it and all that kind of stuff. And here's a heads up, we're not going to look at statting it either. That I will leave to other channels and where you can look at actual numbers and things. But the idea here is how to come up with good ones, which you can then take to the next level by statting and so on. So the first question that we must ask ourselves is always, how will it complete its task? So in other words, if you've got let's say a stellar probe that needs to find humans, or at least a sentient species that is capable of receiving its transmission, how will it complete its task? It will drift around aimlessly until it is found, and in the moment it is found, anything that talks to it, it will immediately attack mentally and cause them to go into this coma. The ring, how will it be found? Well, every time it's worn, it will illuminate its location to the original creator. So you've got to look at how is this object, how is it going to work out? And the way that you do that, of course, is by looking at the individual who created it, going, well, they've created an orb of annihilation that will annihilate any elf that touches it. How is it going to do that? Is it going to use magical means? Is it going to use much more grisly means, in which case when they touch the orb slowly injects them with some kind of substance which they're not aware of, or the orb sucks them in immediately, or the orb becomes super hot and burns the flesh off of their hand and continues to burn up the length of their arm until it reaches their shoulder. This is where you start to describe the mechanics of the magical item, and it can be a really fun and really entertaining space and a really entertaining idea to look at just how is it going to enact its plan. We then need to look at and say, well, what will the magical item do once it's achieved its goal? If its goal is purely, say, catastrophic or chaotic comedy, what happens once the 8th person has grabbed the fish dagger and been slapped in the face with a wet fish because they didn't hold it in a piece of newspaper? One of the magical items that I created for one of my characters was literally a fish dagger. It was a dagger that looked like a fish, and provided that it was in its paper hilt, its newspaper hilt, it stayed absolutely calm. The moment they drew it out to try and use it, they had to make a dexterity check, because that was the system that we were using, to hold on to this wet fish that was flapping around. If they failed, the fish didn't bounce away and go off and just be mundane like that. It attacked them, slapping them repeatedly with their own weapon, until they managed to get control over it, and then they could stab somebody with it. And I'll tell you now how I made it more interesting and a little bit less of a curse, and prompting the players to actually use it later on in the video. So we have to look at how and what is this thing going to do once it's achieved its goal. Is it going to explode? Is it going to melt? Is it going to give a message? Is it going to become inert? What happens once it achieves its goal? And that's an important question, because if its goal is to annihilate an entire species, what happens once it's done with that? Does it bring them back to life so it can do them again, so that it can repeat its process? I don't know. That's up to you. But it does allow you to ask some interesting questions and come up with some interesting answers. We then need to look at how powerful is the cursed object. So a ring that compulses you to put it on. Are you just going to put that ring on all the time and that's it? Sorry, no saving throw for you. It just is what it is. Or are we going to say that the compulsion effect is not very strong and it's subtle? It's weaker, but it's always there. Are we going to add in some other kind of effects? Again, the ring is a good example. If you don't put it on, you start to feel fatigue. You start to feel drawn and all thin. But you put it on and suddenly you feel powerful. So is it a coercive, maybe a more subtle form of power? Is it a sword that once you've gripped it, you can literally never let go of it? Maybe. You have to decide upon that, and that will help guide and determine just how powerful this artifact is. You then have to ask, what is this object going to do to achieve its goal? Now, if the object is not sentient, if it is a simple object like the ring, what is it going to do to achieve its goal? Well, in The Lord of the Rings, they were a little bit vague as to how exactly the ring worked, except that it was always going to be found. Even if it was dropped in the middle of a cave underneath a mountain, it would always somehow be found. That speaks to a device that's able to change fate and the destiny of others, so that they will stumble across it, see it in the bottom of a riverbank whilst fishing, and grab it, and so on. So there are certain magnitudes of power, again, and you have to decide upon this, but how will it go about achieving its goal in terms of what is it capable of doing to get there? That's an important question. We then look at, and this to me are two questions that we need to be very careful about when we are planning this magical item, this cursed item, is we need to determine what are the warning signs. Are there any warning signs that this is a cursed object? Again, we turn to the Lord of the Rings. Gandalf, Galadriel, when they both went near the ring, they could sense the dark power that was emanating off of it. The hobbits, however, were completely unaware of the power that this thing had, and so put it on and took it off as if it was, well, a regular old ring. So certain individuals were aware of its darkness, magic users in particular. We need to see if we want to build in warning signs. Players are all too happy to just put on magical items and see what happens. We need to be cognizant of the fact that if they suddenly put on something that's going to completely alter their character and the path that all of the adventures now suddenly take, we need to be aware of the fact that some of the players might not be happy with that, especially if they had no option whatsoever of avoiding it. If it was going to detect as magical and they didn't use a magic detection spell, if it was carved in some black obsidian type material and was covered in horrific glyphs and runes that spoke of some dread dark language, and they still put it on, then you have given them fair warning. But if it is simply a silver band that when they put on it starts to turn them into a vampire and they can't take it off until they slay 30 virgins by the light of the silvery moon on the 1st of January, that might be a little bit excessive, and there might be grounds there for complaint that you've been a little bit harsh in your deliverance of cursed items. So that is something to think about. And then, of course, finally, the sixth question that you must ask yourself always is, how is this curse going to be removed or lifted? It's very important that you have the method and the means on how to remove the magical item. Because if they put it on and you haven't figured out how they're going to get it off, when they say, well, I cut my finger off to get the ring off, is that going to work? Or does the ring mysteriously appear on another one of their fingers? You have to be careful because they might just start cutting off the whole hand, then their other hand, then their arm, then their elbow. You get the idea. You need to have some very clear ways in which it can be defeated, and more importantly, you have to have the ways in which the players can figure out exactly what it is they need to do. It could very well be that they come across a wise woman who tells them exactly what's going to happen, or they come across a wise man who tells them exactly how to get rid of the object, or they find some text, or there's some pictograms, or there's some references. Ultimately, however, you always need to give the players the opportunity of figuring out how they can remove it. Now, it might be almost impossible for their PCs to remove the magical item. That's okay if somewhat extreme, but the players should always be aware that there is an out. There is a way to get rid of this object. Now, point in case, I had a player who was picked up a demonic sword. The sword had been possessed by a demon, and it was written on the actual blade itself that this blade should never be used against anyone who has a soul. But more importantly, it should never be used against anyone who doesn't have a soul, because there would be dire ramifications. The blade was also designed to be used specifically to bring about the return of this demon, and the way that it was going to do that was by collecting souls and then manifesting the demon lord. The wielder of the blade couldn't get rid of it. They couldn't put it down and they couldn't throw it away. It was always there. And when it got stolen, the individual who stole it was attacked by the weapon until the weapon could return back to its master. So I had worked out all of those ramifications. You have to excuse me, my flu is not yet completely gone, so if I sound a bit strange, you know why. The blade, however, could be destroyed if it was purged of the demon's spirit, which would require the demon to be expelled from the blade and then slain by this very blade. That would cause, of course, the blade to become inert and everyone to be freed. So the players knew this because it was written on the blade. Once they had found someone who could read demonic, they could then work out exactly how they were going to get free, and everyone could be happy. Of course, they used the blade against an undead, a vampire, and all sorts of weird and wonderful ramifications happened as a result. That is all because I had managed to work out all of the answers to those questions, how the blade was going to get its objective achieved, how it had been created, why it had been created, what was it going to do in order to achieve its goal, etc., etc., and how it was going to be defeated. So I knew all of that so that I could bring that to the fore. Now, something that I wanted to talk about particularly was the fact that once we've created these cursed items, firstly, we don't generally use them later on. Now, this particular character happened to die whilst wielding a blade, this demon blade, that was full of souls. It only needed one more soul, and then it would discharge the demon. It, however, also contained the negative essence of a vampire princess. So when this character died and was resurrected, my thinking was, the blade is so near to opening up a portal to release the demon into the prime material plane. It's so fully charged. There is a vampire's negative energy sitting within this blade waiting to be discharged as well. And now we have this holy rite that's bringing back the player. Surely the player should return to this earth, return to this world as a quasi-demon, quasi-vampire character. The vampire's negative energy is released when the resurrection spell is cast. The demon is expelled from the blade because one could argue that the soul of the individual wielding it was infused within the blade, and yet it would all be contained within the player's character. That turned into a remarkable journey, and I spoke to the player before I had it happen. I said, listen, I've got this idea to turn you into a demonic undead. Do you have a problem with that? You will still be able to play your character, but I require that you play an evil character. And boy, oh boy, did that player do exactly that. It was rather terrifying. Let's just say sacks of babies dropped into rivers didn't move a muscle on his face as he watched, or she in this particular case, watched them all perish. So he played his evil character right perfectly. So the idea is to use your magical items when you go beyond. The idea is to make these magical items have impact when other things happen. Think about what the magical item is trying to achieve and what is happening to the character, and if it's in the same alignment, well, the magical item should be happy to go along with it. Now, the other thing to bear in mind, and I said this when I was doing the video on creating your own magical items, is when you are creating cursed items, the cursed item is really going to be a negative for the player. And that is something that I don't particularly like. The player gets stuck with this thing which causes them to have issues which no other player's characters got. So there's a bit of an imbalance there. Yes, there's a strong narrative, and I love the narrative opportunities that cursed items bring with them, but I feel that cursed items are redundant if they have no value outside of just being cursed. There should be something, a silver lining. The character who maybe is destined to become undead starts to realize that they no longer need to eat, and they're immune to poison, and they can breathe underwater because, well, they don't need to breathe anymore. So there needs to be some kind of upshoot. There needs to be some kind of, I feel anyway, benefit, because otherwise the player has very little reason, especially if breaking the curse is a complicated thing or if it's a difficult thing. The player is going to become disenchanted with their character. They're going to go, well, I have to play this because it's what I've got, and it's going to take us 6 months to get it off of me, and for those 6 months I'm basically redundant. A magical item that removes all spells from a wizard or reduces his memory to only one spell is particularly vindictive and nasty, unless it adds that now he can't cast those spells, but now he can cast these spells. A magical item that converts the gender of the player from one into the other. Again, it's on the surface humorous, but there should be some kind of bigger implication. There should be something more to it than just that. So when you're creating your cursed items, think about all of these things. Think about what it's adding to the game, but most importantly of all, don't create magical items to punish PCs. Don't create magical items because your players just put equipment on without checking its magical properties first. That's just being nasty. Create cursed items that have reason, that have purpose, and dare I say it, that have a narrative behind them, a narrative ahead of them, and a narrative that will include the players if they are using it, or even if they're trying to prevent it from being used by others. That's the key here, in my opinion, is to create these magical cursed items that, of course, have some kind of narrative value. So, until next time, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can now join us, by the way, on a thing called rpgtablefinder.com. Now, this is in response to something that all of you have been asking for. Well, not all of you, some of you, a lot of you, all right, one of you. There was a question once whether or how or if we knew of role-playing platforms out there that allowed you to find other players in your area to either get together for tabletop role-playing or to get together for good old-fashioned online role-playing, and we responded by having the web goblin flogged repeatedly until eventually he created a web-based app for us, and that is now in the form of rpgtablefinder.com. If you head on over there, you can create a profile, you can find tables of players, all who watch this channel, so they're all like-minded, which means we're all narrative-driven, fun individuals who are hopefully slightly a cut above the rest, all waiting there to join games with you. Now, we've also added, or will be adding in the next week or so, depending on how much juice we can squeeze out of the Web Goblin, board games as well. So you don't just have to do role-playing, you can have board game evenings and meet your fellow players and network and socialize from that. And the whole thing is free, absolutely free. All my videos are on the app as well, on the web-based app. Don't worry, you don't download them beforehand. You download them as you want to, so that you can get refreshers on there. And there's also handy little links to things that you can go and pick up from Amazon to make your games just that much more, perhaps entertaining. Anyway, if you haven't seen it yet, go and check it out, www.rpgtablefinder.com, or you can head on over to our regular website, www.greatgamemaster.com, and there is something special coming up for you in the next couple of weeks, hopefully before Christmas, if I can beat the Web Goblin into submission. There will be something waiting underneath your proverbial Christmas tree. Until next time, however, I wish you and yours the most cursed and happiest of gaming.